Lifeline Australia for over 10 years. So cut my teeth on and prior to that, community development in all kinds of areas, domestic violence and a whole range of program areas that I worked in. Prior to that, I was in business for about 10 years, in banking and in the IT sector. It's been very useful, those skills, in the work I've done. But the experience with Lifeline was particularly valuable because, for those of you who don't know much about Lifeline, it's in 42 centres across Australia. When I started with the organisation, there were 42 separate boards, there were 42 separate autonomous organisations, half a part of the church, half community-based, but all supposedly trying to do the same thing. So it was like turning the Titanic to try to get everybody on the same agenda, measuring the same things, doing the same work. So I learned a lot of really valuable skills in that time about how to, without authority and power, direct authority and power, how to influence people towards a change agenda. So it wasn't crucible at times, but we learned together many valuable lessons about how to do change across a very diverse group of actors and players and organisations. So that's kind of a little bit of background about me and why am I interested in collective impact? I think like Michael, I had a period of time where I felt somewhat frustrated by the level of change that we were seeing, the results we were getting across the community through individual programs and even through an individual organisation, even one as large as Lifeline or as large as Beyond Blue and well-resourced as Beyond Blue. So I had this feeling that we needed to be better at collaborating and coordinating our efforts, didn't quite know how that would work and what that would look like. So went on a discovery journey to try to explore what were the methodologies, the thinking, what were people doing elsewhere. Came across collective impact, seemed like a no-brainer in so many ways. But since then, so for the last almost 3 years, have been deep diving into trying to understand how do we actually do this. Still feel very much like a student. I don't think anyone's an expert in this work. It is a discovery journey. We're all on a learning journey together, and we're all bringing our own individual experiences and knowledge to the table. And there's, as Michael said this morning, it is disciplined work. And there is, I believe, we need a university to capture all of the work. And I would challenge anyone from university to think about maybe extending on the business school model to have a social sector school, because I think that's where the work is. We need to harness all of the best knowledge together to really do this work. It's not simple work. So, just a couple of tidbits that might just get us started in thinking about getting started. So the things that I've learned from others and my own experience about getting started very much is, so one of the things I asked when I did a study tour to the US and talked to lots of people doing this work, I said, so what's been the biggest learning for you? And one of the things that they all said was, save yourself 5 years and don't start a project. I think a valuable piece of wisdom. I think all too often have used a simplistic approach towards what are complex issues often, and we've rushed to a solution, devised a project to try to deal with a complex issue, and then spent 3 to 5 years learning that actually it didn't really nail the problem. So thinking about new ways to approach finding solutions that take more time in the early stages, going slow to go fast, taking more time on the discovery phase, getting the data, understanding what's really going on for people, spending more time with people with a lived experience of whatever the issues that we're trying to solve, spending more time listening than coming up with solutions, rushing to a solution. One of the other big gems that for me I think is just the area of this is collective impact is cross-sectional work. Too often I think, sort of my experience has been that when we thought about the stakeholders to get into the room, we would just think about the service providers and not think about business community, all levels of government, and people with a lived experience community. We need to make sure that we have everybody in the room. When we're talking, this complex work is systems work. It's thinking is mind-boggling. It so challenges the way that we approach problems. So learning the skills around understanding how systems work and what are the levers to change a system, and understanding a system from all perspectives requires being able to get into the room with all parts of the system. So, and usually our communities are impacted by economics, by businesses, by government decisions, by policy, by people and the choices they make, behaviours, and also by the service sector. So having the service sector there alone is not enough as a starting point. We need to get all parts of the system. So they're the two little bits I'm just going to throw in. I'm going to hand over to Michael to do a little intro.
All right. So what I want to begin to try to do for you is I want to try to tell you how we operationalize collective impact. So you heard me talk about the container. So what I'm getting ready to do is try to tell you how we do it and how I try to use this to manage all of the complexity that I deal with. So I deal with the White House, I deal with Congress, I deal with 61 communities and their communities. Each community probably has 20 or 30 organizations that they're partnering with. I have my own organizational policy, politics. The institute that I run is made up of actual 3 organizations: the Harlem Children's Zone, Jeff Canada's work, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and then PolicyLink. So I'm trying to manage 3 organizations as one, the federal stuff and the stuff on the ground. When I talk about discipline execution, we use the concept results-based accountability. Results-based accountability is in a book called Trying Hard is Not Good Enough. If you didn't do anything but read the first 3 chapters, you'd be good to go. Because here's really what you're trying to do. And this is what we say. Whenever we start leading now, as Don was saying, we usually started the primary task being we would start a program. We get some people in the room and say, let's just do something. Your job as a leader now is to be very clear about the primary task and force people to do it not in a technical way, but in an adaptive way. That's why it takes so long. You could have someone sit in a room and fill this out like it was a class project. And they could fill it out and it would look pretty. The only problem is when you try to implement it, people aren't behaving this way. And that's the adaptive work. So the first thing is we want to say we got 16 million children in poverty. That's the population. It may be smaller, it may be bigger, but the first thing you want to do is get clear about what is the population that we're trying to serve? What are the conditions of well-being we want to see for that population? Can we get clear about the results? For us, it's 10 results, and then it's 15 indicators. So when you said, how does Promise Neighborhoods measure its effectiveness? It is by 10 results and 15 indicators. It takes some time for a community to want to land that. Again, that's something that someone could sit in a room and write up, but usually when that happens, people just smile and then they don't play along. The processing of the 10 results and 15 indicators is a bunch of literature and evidence out there about what are good indicators, what are good results. So you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to recreate the process of trying to land this. You have to try to spend your time trying to get community buy-in to what you want to do. Here's the reality. Every community is always saying the same thing: jobs, education, school, etc. It's just the local context that you're trying to bring on it. Once you do that, once you've got the results, and then once you have the measures of progress, the indicators, what we say to people then is this is where it gets really important. Because now we ask you for every indicator in your community, what's the story behind the curve? Why is that indicator trending in a particular direction? Because what we believe is, if you can't interpret the environment and tell me why an indicator is trending in a particular direction, then you can't tell me you've landed the strategy. And this is why it's so important, because often we'll say, we want to do these indicators. We'll skip over why something is going on and just start doing stuff. So I automatically know usually there's a high probability that the strategy is wrong. That's why after 3 years you're resetting all the time. This is very important because we know there's a trend to this work. Big fanfare, you launch, 2 or 3 years, you're resetting and people are trying to save face because they're embarrassed, don't want to be embarrassed publicly. But it's usually because you haven't asked the question. Is it a systemic reason why the indicator is trending a particular way? I'll give you 2 examples. In Chula Vista, Hispanic community right outside of San Diego, California, they know their community. They did a survey. They were trying to get parents to try to get their kids to go to college and get a culture of wanting to do that. They did a survey and it said that 90% of the parents were saying, yes, we're talking to our children about going to college. They thought that was good, but a worker in the community looked at that number and said, that doesn't make sense. What's going on? The parents were talking to their kids about going to college, but they were telling them not to go. They were afraid of that they would be deported. They were afraid that they would not stay home, come back to the community. So yes, they were. But you can very quickly see, you start doing a college graduation program, and you don't even have the story right. And that's a perfect example right there where if you don't take the time to get the story behind the curve, your strategies are off base. Then what we say to people is once you understand that, the why, you're still not ready to go to strategy yet. What we want you to begin to do is get the baseline. Where are we moving from? What's the data say about where we're moving from? How bad is it? Then, can we get commitment about what we want to do? Progress is not made from going to 0 to 16 million in 3 years. It may be 0 to 100,000 in year 1. By year 3, we may be at 1 million. It's a steady march. So when funders ask you, well, I'm giving you $25,000 and I want you to change the world, first thing you should say is, you know what? Wrong answer. You're actually not doing collective impact. What you're doing is funding a program. If you want to buy results, there's a different way. If you're not asking me this stuff, you're contributing to the problem. Because I actually can't get to collective impact until we go through this and then line the money up. The reality is I've got to be able to tell you the baseline. I've got to be able to tell you the targets. Then I can tell you the evidence-based solutions because now I know what the story is for each indicator. Then I can line the partners up. Now notice how far we've gone along before we ever got to talking about partners. In America, what we usually do, we get 100 people in the room and we start partners. We don't do any of this other work. And then we realized that we only needed 10 of those people in the room. Now we've got to figure out how to get the other 90 out of the way. The problem is they're mad. So you can see now nobody wants to talk about collective impact anymore. They're mad. So now you've got a whole community that's actually working against your effort. Once you get the partners, then it is about getting partner performance measures. This is always easy when you're dealing with small organizations. What we find in the States is that like the United Ways and the Boys and Girls Clubs, these big institutions who don't have to play by the rules, sometimes really resist the worst because no one's ever said, I'm holding you accountable for delivering. And so your partners have to then have their performance measures, tied to the targets so that you know, when I look at you and you say, you know what, you want to get to 1 million in a year, who does what? That's the discipline, folks. This is the process that we use. And what I can tell you is this. Sites resisted it. Some sites said, we're not doing this. They did the same old thing. Every promised neighborhood who did that, they came right back to this because they're not successful right now. So as you can see, our job has been to focus everyone's energy to start the journey right. Help foundations understand that until this work is done, you're just dreaming if you think you're going to get some results. And then to ask the question, now how much does that cost? Now this is an abundance approach because every partner has the right to say this is going to be expensive because we're talking about a 16 million population. I'm not talking about a $25,000 grant. Now we can line up our capital the same way business does, right? Line up our capital to buy the results. That means that now I can get money for admin. How many of you all deal with foundations that don't want to pay for your core operating support? They want you to run a business but not imagine that there's heat and electricity that has to be going on here. No, don't tell me how to run my business. Hold me accountable for delivery. You see the different conversation you can have? If you tell me you want to give me a $25,000 grant, I got to stop doing that. And I don't want to do this, and I don't want to deliver on this, well, then we don't need to have a result conversation. What we need to have is a program conversation. You see my point? I'll take your $25,000, I'll do a task. But let's not be confused. A task is not collective impact. And then finally, what I would say is, all the while we're doing this, we do something that's called, and I can email this to you, with partners, we're trying to get what we call the boundary of authority, role, and task. Who's doing what? Who's authorized to do what? Why? That's a lot of negotiation that's got to go on because this is about power and money right here. The sharing of it. And we often don't want to have that conversation, so that's why this stuff breaks down. And then lastly, you can figure out the infrastructure that can be done either collectively or individually. A lot of this infrastructure, every organization, every partner doesn't need to have this. You can imagine if you got 30 people having 30 different data systems. You see my point? On top of the school districts, the government systems, et cetera. Imagine if this was the backbone that you bought as funders and then everybody was freed up to do their work. That's the work that we're trying to make people do in collective impact. So this is how we've operationalized collective impact within Promised Neighborhoods. I can tell you, we're the most results-oriented federal program right now after 3 years out the gate. I can tell you our sites are actually accelerating faster than most folks who are being undisciplined. And they did resist doing this. And what we finally said to them was, you know what, as a technical assistance provider, here's what I commit to you. I'm not going to waste your time. If you don't do this work, there's actually no reason for me to come out and talk to you because we're not ready to do work. So this is the adaptive work that Heifetz talks about in Leadership on the Line. If a community doesn't want to do this work, don't waste your time with them. They're not ready, and that's okay. If they don't want to do this work, I'm not going to waste my time because they're not ready, and that's okay. A community will move when it's ready. But when you move, what we're trying to help people understand is there's a different way. Make sense? I'll stop there.
Questions? Thoughts, questions, challenges, anything you're grappling with?
I'm interested in the long time frame. I worked in the aid sector in government, and I worked on an unsuccessful project in that time, and that was because it was very long term. I worked in Papua New Guinea. Can I yell? Yeah. Okay, I worked in Papua New Guinea for about 40 years, and I worked in the aid sector, and I worked in private enterprise, and I worked with mining companies also. And one of the key indicators of anything that was ever going to work was the length of time. People don't change their attitudes quickly. I mean, this is really a key issue because our governments change every 3 years or 4 years or whatever. Yet the time frame required for adaptation and change is considerably longer than that. And without bipartisan support, you lose funding for all sorts of critical things happen. So that's where I'm very interested in how this works.
I can tell you in the States, we have, as a nonprofit sector, been the worst branders, and our lies have finally caught up with us. We've got a whole country thinking that you can do this work in 3 years. And so when you can't then the Republicans can come in and say, I'm taking your money. That's the lie that we told. But we told that lie because we were focusing on programs and how our programs designed. You compete to the lowest common denominator. Let me lie and say I can change the world for $5. You said $5, I can do it for $2.50. That doesn't make sense. What we're saying here is when I'm telling someone about the population, I can hold any type of conversation I want to have with them, right? You tell me how much money you're going to give me. You tell me what your contribution is going to be. That's a different conversation. See, what we do is say, funders don't get to sit on the fence now and cast judgment. What I want to understand is what is your contribution as a partner? You see my point? It's not just your money. It may be your political leverage to change a system. So no one's free. If you don't have a contribution, what I say is you shouldn't be in the room. Every person, every personality is adding new complexity to an already complex problem. So for me, I don't talk about time frame until we've done this work and I know how much money is on the table. You see my point? Don't let people rope you into something that they're not even committed to anyway.
I've got a question around, you talked about scale and stage as one of your outcomes. Obviously you seem to be very heavily branded with the Obama administration's program. If there was, for argument's sake, a Republican administration, two parts of the question. First, what risk is there to the Promised Neighbourhoods program? And secondly, do you have a plan B for cut-off? And how can you sustain yourselves without public support?
Yes, so what I would always tell people is I could care less about Promised Neighborhoods. And the reason for that is because what I care about is cradle to career, opportunity for children. See, that's what I care about. You can call it Promised Neighborhoods tomorrow, you can call it Timbuktu the next day, you can call it Saving Neighborhoods the next. The programmatic branding is irrelevant if I'm doing this work. So what I try to get people to understand is this is going to be the work for the next 20 years for us. It may be Promised Neighborhoods under the Obama administration. If a Republican come in, they can call it something else. Our job is to position things so that they understand this way of behaving is the work. And so often what we do is we don't land the way of behaving. We keep talking about programs. I'm not talking about promised neighborhoods. That's just how I entered the game. You see my point? The strategy is to get communities to begin to build the infrastructure to do cradle to career work year in and year out. So that means on top of the federal dollars, that was just the catalyzing agent. Our job is to help them attract state dollars, city dollars, county dollars, and federal dollars. So in Minneapolis, they've gone, in St. Paul, Minnesota, they've gone to the state. They've started getting money for this system. Jacksonville, Florida, Orlando, Florida, and Miami, Florida, same thing. California has a Promised Neighborhoods bill going forward in the state. So that's how you fund it. This system is enduring because what we're saying is this is the work, folks. The work is communities of opportunity. Don't get distracted. 16 million in poverty need a community of opportunity. You see my point? And if you try to hold that, again, you see how I'm able to hold all sorts of conversations by being clear around my discipline, right? That's how. And what we find is actually Republicans don't want to resist this when you're delivering. What they're actually mad about is stuff that doesn't work. So the model that this is based off of, Jeff Canada's work, the Harlem Children's Zone, the majority of his board is Republicans, Wall Street bankers. So we think we have great traction and great opportunity because this isn't about ideology. People want you to deliver, and we believe if we don't deliver, we don't deserve to exist anyway.
Sure. Yeah. You were saying that, like, if community's not ready, don't go ahead. What about if there's major stakeholders that work with, say, an Aboriginal community that aren't engaging in stuff, but you know that half of there is community out there that want to engage and be part of something, but services sort of like back off because a major stakeholder's not involved? How would you work on that?
So I would say we deal with this in the States all the time. It's usually being in communities of color, poor communities. Everybody wants to go in and help them, but they're rarely at the table. The first thing I always say is when I look at the partners thing, where's the family's contribution? If I don't see it, you haven't done your work. There's no way you could be helping a community and their contributions aren't front and center. I'm looking to see, are they sharing power? Are they not? A perfect example is usually in the States, we just do community meetings. We bring the people in from the community and we report out to them about what we're doing to them. I was at a meeting in Cleveland and I saw this happen. A professor at a university was breaking down the data that was showing the children weren't being educated. A few of the parents were in the room and they were being fed and they were just looking attentively and asking a few questions. And then this allowed me to do something that most people couldn't do. I saw this happen and I just interrupted them for a second. I said, can we stop for a second? I said, ma'am, why are you asking the professor what to do with your children? And I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the child lives in your home. The reality was that mom had learned to come to a meeting and be helpless because no one was asking her to contribute. You see what I'm saying? No one, this was like a research project to them. Let's just have the community folks come in and report out because that's community engagement. So the mom had learned, much like students learn oftentimes to with a professor, the professor knows everything. You project into the professor your helplessness, right? That's the problem with community engagement in the community because most of us see it as an academic exercise, not one about authentic alignment of contribution, whether it's the people in that community or it's a business leader. And so to me, the way you get away from that is actually, I have to see your contribution here. If I see that there, then I can work through the race issues, the power issues, the class issues. Without that, I'm doing it in a vacuum and I can't work through it. You see my point? I can push in ways that I can't push if I'm holding this. The woman invited me and allowed me to push her. Without this, she would have called me an Uncle Tom. She would have called the white guy a racist. You see my point? But she got it. I was like, why are you here? You're eating dinner and we're talking about your kids and you're going to walk out of here with just a meal? Really? Are you here just to eat?
Yeah, maybe.
Right. And if you are, then say that, right? We're not having a problem-solving meeting. We're just having a community dinner. See my point?
Oh, I know.
That's right. And that's the problem. But the leaders have to be really willing to engage community people in a different way than they have in the past, which is to share in their voice, share in their opinion, share in what they want to do in terms of the strategic direction. And that's the hard work. That's why I said you can't do this by just going into a room and writing this up. You got to process that stuff, right?
I was just going to ask basics lessons on how to be active citizens. I get the feeling that we've been positioned in such a passive way over such a long time that it takes something quite extraordinary of us law-abiding citizens to go out and stand at a rally in the park in support of something. It's like, oh my God, are my children going to be taken off this or something? You know, like we're used to being passive, and I guess I see the alternative to passive as, oh, well, there's graffiti artists down at the skate park. That's active citizenship. I almost don't know how to be anything other than passive in my city. So I'm that mother at that community meeting, sitting on my skirt tail going, gee, I'd like to say something. I don't know how to. How do we address that if that's a thing? Is that a thing?
It is a thing. I think it's a really great point. Jeff Agner and Liz Skelton wrote a great book that was just published at the end of last year called Paradox of Leadership. And they explore 4 paradoxes. Yep. Mike, you need Mike. Sorry, there's a lot of background in this. Sorry. So Liz Skelton and Jeff Agner from Social Leadership Australia, which is part of the Benevolent Society, they wrote a book published at the end of last year called The Paradox of Leadership, and it explores the 4 paradoxes that they've unpacked around our culture, so Australian culture, and they call it the ocean we swim in. And there's a whole lot of paradoxes, and one of those is this kind of passive approach on the one hand where we've become utterly dependent on government to tell us what to do. And that's been one of the unintended consequences, I think, of the government being very generous in social sector work and so investing in social sector work. And on the other hand, we have this fierce independence and we don't want to be told what to do. But we're caught betwixt and between. And there's several others. I can't recall all of them off the top of my head. But when I read it, I thought, yes. And every time we engage with communities, all of those paradoxes are going on, and those cultural sort of disconnects, if you like. And we are often conflicted individually. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to comment on that.
I'm just saying, like, I look at my community, and it's about 90% of my community that that are pretty suppressed, through trauma, and that from generation to generation. And I can see that, and I see so many good programs out there in non-Aboriginal organisations, and it's about and having that round table to say, if only you had an Aboriginal worker, it would engage so much into communities and things like that. So, having this today just really opened my eyes up to say, when are we going to have that round table and talk and be able to express it without being coming across as bullying or whatever, or too forward and things like that, because
one of the great process pieces that the Tamarack Institute uses for their work working in communities around poverty is they have these round tables. I think over a year they have about 3 of them. And they invite 40 people to the round table, 10 of whom are from government, all levels of government, 10 business people, 10 people from service sector, social sector, community sector, and 10 people with a lived experience. So, Liz Weaver, who has sort of championed a lot of this, says it completely changes the conversation when you've got kind of equal numbers of people with a lived experience, because you can't talk in acronyms. You can't, sort of being vague about government programs. You're not sitting there positioning yourself to get funding from somebody because that would be inappropriate. You're really focused on the people who you're there to support. So maybe thinking creatively about how do you have those roundtables so that the people with the lived experience, the people that you're wanting to give opportunity to, are at the centre of the conversation.
I'm really interested in the infrastructure, the backbone organisation that you talk about as being one of the keys to the collective impact framework. A couple of questions. What attributes do you see culturally in that organisation that put them forward? How do you select your backbone organisation? So I'm thinking in this city, you could look at a couple of NGOs who might be, or more, who might be that backbone organisation. How do you choose who is the best backbone organisation
So
to form that?
So I would say it depends, but I'll tell you how we tried to do it. Seeing we are a new organization on the scene, I think it was to our advantage that we were new, because I had to really try to figure out our value early on, because people were looking at us like, why are you here? So our value is in acceleration, evidence, scale, and sustainability. What I'm saying is, I'm gonna build an organization that can run faster and do that stuff faster than, I'm gonna build an organization that can do this faster and better than anyone else. You can go and find plenty of organizations that can do these tasks. Can you find organizations that will be courageous enough to lead on it? And so to me, what I would say is I'm looking for an organization that will be respectfully disruptive, that it has the temperament to be respectful, but it understands that its job now is to disrupt systems that are very good at getting the results that they're getting. I always say, systems do exactly what they're designed to do. There's a reason why they're getting the results they're getting. They're designed brilliantly to do it. And so if you're going to go and get a backbone organization that's just going to be polite, that is just going to be a tactician, that's just going to do what they're told, I can tell you organizations that have gotten millions of dollars in the Promised Neighborhood program, and they have all sorts of expertise around data, for example. But because they were paid to do this little piece about data, when they consulted with the community, they never brought their expertise into the room. That's criminal. So I need an organization right now that can do this and be disruptive. And be disruptive in a way that they can survive. So what we said is, you know what? There's no one out on the landscape that's doing this, really, and doing this, and forcing their network to do this. You won't find another organization that has 61 communities going through this process trying to be disruptive at the federal level. So to me, that's what I would look for, and I think that's one of the things we've got to be very careful of, because this is where politics comes in. You go with the organizations that everybody knows and has the big boards that will be mad if you don't go with them, but then they end up doing the same old work. When I said you take your leadership up differently, this is where it matters. Do you have an organization that's going to take its leadership up differently? Because this is going to require people to get pushed. And are you going to back down when people get mad and say, no, I don't want to go through this process, right? The same is with the community engagement. Are you going to have people who watch that dynamic and just accept it? Or are they going to push back and not be afraid that, wow, she could have really pushed back on me? Great. That's the conversation we need to have.
I suppose a supplementary to that would be if you're in a landscape where most of those large organisations have got by and I don't mean to be anyway, disrespectful, but it's effectively being part of the game or being part of the established structure. To me, that respect for disruptive requires a major cultural shift, either a major cultural shift within an organisation or a semi-autonomous expression of one of these bodies to take up this new work. So you'd be requiring, I guess what I'm saying is you'd be requiring the most senior leadership to embrace respectful disruption, or you'd be looking for a model that allows for some kind of autonomy, supported autonomy to go in this new, fresh way.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that because you're absolutely right. That's totally correct. And so there's many different, we've only got 10 minutes to go, maybe slightly less. So there are many collective impact initiatives where the backbone is being done in a variety of different ways. So some of the things that people are saying is independence is really important, so not being an existing service provider. So you're not actually competing in the milieu for funding. So that's one of the attributes potentially, that leadership skill set and adaptive leadership, servant leadership, the ability to build trust, the ability to have the hard conversations, the ability to have the focus on results, all of those things. And it may be, in many instances, many of the collective impact initiatives, it's been a completely new entity designed particularly to do this because most organisations are busy doing other stuff, delivering programs and projects. So when there's that internal conflict to survive, it's too big of a switch. So, and one of the other things that many people have said is important is that the backbone entity often emerges out of the community and the community chooses it, if you like, rather than someone else choosing the backbone because they've got the respect, because they've got the runs on the board, because they've demonstrated how to do this and be disruptive in a respectful way. So they're all things to think about. But from my point of view, I think the independence is incredibly important. To not be in the mix competing for funding, it makes it really hard otherwise.
I want to ask if you can talk about sacrifice within the workplace and within, your, where you are and where you stand in terms of, like, I guess you could call it a hierarchy. There's a lot of things that you're overlooking, a lot of people, a lot of programs, and, where we talk about, this, in my mind as a business model, because you've got so many people and so many programs underneath you, and to flourish and really get to that population that you keep getting back to, how do you wade through the people, but also the programs and the messages and all of the different communities that are coming and needing help and things? How do you I guess choose and wade through all of that and use, I guess, sacrifice in a less business way?
I would just simply say it's really easy when I have this. When I have this, I can diagnose. See, to me, I can't even have a conversation about a backbone organization, a strategy, or whatever until we've done this work. When I've done this work, I can know who I need to hire, who I need to fire, because I got performance measures. You see my point? It's very easy for me to decide where to spend my time. Like I said, if communities don't want to do this work, I'm not wasting my time. I'm on the road 60% of the time. I could be at home with my wife. You see my point? So I'm very clear with people. I'm only in the business to do work around results. And if you don't want to do that, I can respect that. I'm just not wasting my time with you. And my staff knows that as well. If we don't deliver, we get fired. It's not about playing around. And the last thing I'll say is, this type of work requires people who want to work. This work, it's a big lift. This is not something that I'm going to check out at 5 o'clock every day. I can't do this work if my wife is going to be mad if I'm traveling, right? So when I took this job, we sat down and we talked. This is a different type of work and a different type of behavior, and you got to want to buy that. You can't buy just saying, I want to do this, but then you don't want to spend the time. It's my job to keep the balance, but it does require that you run really hard. And when you do this, the ability to make smart decisions becomes easier. And if people get upset, I at least can hold it, and they at least know that I'm being fair because they see that I'm not being arbitrary in how I'm doing this. Make sense? You want to say anything, Don?
So if we in Launceston decided that, yeah, okay, maybe collective impact might do for us, the process of deciding what would be our top 10 results that we aspire for, what's the process of getting to that step? Is it like, right, we're having a meeting, we're going to turn up if you want to be at the table to decide what results should shape this place? Is it that simple or not?
No. I guess, first of all, you need to go on a discovery exercise around the data. So what is the problem in Launceston? Is it that there aren't enough jobs? Is it, what are the issues that are, and then getting your baseline data and working out what's the change you want to see, what's the result. So a lot of it's the early work is the discovery work on getting your baseline data and understanding that.
I guess my question is, who decides?
Okay.
Because even that, there's power in that.
Who decides?
What results should count in this region? Because yes, we need jobs, yes, we need improved outcomes for children, etc., but who decides?
Well, I guess that's where it comes to the community. So what would, we're about times just about up, what would young people expect? Do all 18-year-olds want to be able to get a job? If that's one of your targets, then that's the result you need to go after. So that's where you put people in the centre of that conversation. Did you want to add to that?
I agree. I say, to me, this is the value. I go with the voice of the community. Pick one and get going. Don't spend a lot of time arguing on it. It's going to be the same stuff. It's not rocket science. Those of us in positions of service, we're so arrogant. We always think we got to lead with what we want. I'm going to find where the traction is in the community and go with it. I can't solve the problems of education without solving the problems of housing, without solving the problems of health anyway. So my job is to pick one, not 10, get going on it, learn how to do this, work this way together as a community, then we can take on anything. You see my point? There's not a promised neighborhood that is taking on all 10 right now. So I say pick one, get going, learn to do this, community will be better for it. Thank you.
One last question?
My question sort of relates back to the one previous to, and looking at the impact that you have in terms of the whole population. What do you see as the turning point for the federal government in terms of individual politicians to give you license to fund, your kind of drawing all? I see the similarities between what's happening in the States and what we have in Australia is that we have state-funded programs and federally funded programs, NGOs, trying to draw all that together almost feels like it doesn't need to come from an overarching body. So what was the tipping point in the US at the point here that you were given license to do that?
It was just politics. You had an opportunity where an administration came in that was conscious about this work. That was it. That's how politics works. It's not all